Clash of the Titans. If you think Jim Bennett and Jacob Hansen are Titans. Today we're going to be reviewing a heated conversation that I think needs to be reviewed because it's an important topic. And joining me for this live stream, we have, his name is, if I can get it to switch screens, Taylor Purser. What's up, dude?
Hey guys, how's it going?
There we go. Okay.
Happy to be here. Yeah.
All right, and let me pull up the agenda real quick, which I totally forgot to do. We're kind of going all over the place here, so stand by as I get this up, which is right here. Okay, on today's show, we have the Through Elephant's Eyes segment, Jim Bennett versus Jacob Hansen in a crazy showdown. We're going to break it down because this is something that needs to be talked about. It's a conversation they had over a year ago, and you know, it's still, they didn't really settle their differences, and it's something that I still think is needs to be talked about. Trunk Treasures, debating free will, LDS versus Christians, hot topic on X. It's something that I even made a short about recently, and so we're going to see what some people are saying about that. Pretty cool stuff. And then last, we'll hit the breaking news, the big Ears Bulletin. RetzLive, Retzlaff, RetzSexual assault. You thought I was going to say Retzlaff, but no, RetzSexual assault. What? We got to talk about this because it happened a few days ago. I didn't have the chance to react to it yet, and it's an important thing, you know, and that's what a lot of people are talking about, the relationship between the church, BYU, non-member, sexual assault. We'll just kind of talk about what people are saying, the latest breaking news there. But Taylor, you had the chance to review this Jim Bennett and Jacob conversation.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Like, what are your thoughts? Just overall, your big overview before we kind of get into the nitty gritty.
Yeah, I didn't, when you sent me this video, I was like, oh, I don't think I've seen this one. And then I remembered, like, as I started getting into it, I'm like, I don't know anybody who in the Latter-day Saint YouTube space that probably hasn't seen this one. This is a super popular video. I feel like, and I honestly, it obviously brought some emotions for both Jacob and Jim. So I think definitely worth talking about, analyzing, and it's worth to point out some of the things that go on in there, because I think that this is the biggest issue that affects Latter-day Saints in the church today. It's the biggest issue out there, and so it needs to be talked about more and more. And I'm super excited to dive into it because there's definitely some interesting stuff and stuff that needs to be talked about. So,
all right, let's do it. This first segment is called Through Elephant's Eyes. All right. So hopefully you got my screen here. We're going to be looking at some of the clips here. So let's just get into the first clip, and so we can start talking about some of this. Just to break down some of the background, this conversation happened on Mormon book reviews. So Stephen Pinecker hosted both of them to share their differences. He's friends with both Jacob and Jim. The conversation started off quite casual, quite friendly. And then, from what I understand, Jim was kind of caught off guard because Jacob started asking some questions that I think Jim wasn't prepared to talk about. And the whole conversation really started centering around the family proclamation, LGBTQ stuff. Very important topics when it comes to the church, as Taylor pointed out. So let's look at this first clip where they...
Maybe tell us, what does it say to you? What does it say that you think is important that people understand your view of the family proclamation, and why it's important that you feel that your view gets out there?
Well, the family proclamation talks about marriage being ordained of God. It talks about the important nature of the family in the plan of salvation. It talks about the importance of putting family life at the centerpiece of every individual's life. And I think all of those are laudable and wonderful things. The things that are taken from the family proclamation.
Ooh, the things that are taken.
Are inferences. For instance, Many transgender Latter-day Saints embrace the Family Proclamation's single sentence mention of gender, because it talks about gender being an essential part of our eternal identity and purpose.
Okay, so I'm going to pause it right there. That's an interesting take by Jim, as you said, Taylor. So I actually have like a whole video where I went through and, dissected that statement about gender in the Family Proclamation. And it was mostly brought about because of this statement by Jim. I remember watching this, and I went back and looked at the Family Proclamation. It says gender is an essential characteristic of an individual's eternal, premortal, mortal, and postmortal life. And if you want to check out that video, you can. But when you break down what that's saying, I think the conclusion that I come to, at least, is Jim's absolutely wrong. Like you can't be like, my spirit is at odds with my body. That doesn't really make sense, because you are both your body and your spirit, because that is an essential characteristic, meaning if it weren't so, you wouldn't even be the same person anymore. And so you can't not have it that way. Anyway, for more details, check out the video I made about the truth about gender in the Family Proclamation. What do you think, Taylor?
So I like this whole thing where, and I don't know Jim. I honestly, before this video, I didn't even know who Jim was. I'm really not on Twitter much, or X, but I think that's
he's off Twitter now. He's ran away after Trump won the election, from what I've been told.
Oh, I'm not shocked then. But yeah, when these, and I don't know what his education background is, but it's most often people who are educated, and they'll try to like supplant this definition of gender. I remember my freshman year of college, I took a sociology class and left, never again returned to anything sociology related, because I was just horrified by the linguistics that these kind of people play. And they just kind of say, oh, let's redefine gender to mean a social construct, when, for the large part of history, gender has always been directly connected to biological sex. And so what he's doing is he's saying, oh, well, trans Latter-day Saints here have, they totally agree with this idea that gender is an eternal characteristic. However, they feel like they're in the wrong, they're at odds with their gender, because it's up way too much, when in reality, if you really steel man what the proclamation is saying here, and it's funny because he'll go saying, I can't believe Oaks will try to wait. No, this is what we meant. Well, yeah, he was one of the guys there.
I know, that's the funny thing. It's like they had to go back and clarify. It's like, you mean the authors who like, and you don't believe them, yeah. You believe just like what was in the document. I suppose that is kind of an interesting take on his part.
We're not going to take his word for it. We're not going to try to steel man his point. Yeah, and so I find that laughable, and I think that whole hijacking of the word gender, which is what it's mainly left-wing people, but it's what people do, is they play semantics and they try to change the definition on things, and that's how you can end up in this place where you're just flat out wrong. I mean, it's not what the proclamation is talking about at all.
Yeah. Interesting. I see the Church of Korhor says, except it is objectively valid to say that gender is not contingent upon chromosomes. I don't know who he's talking to or whatnot, but sure, there's some biology things that are interesting when it comes to it, but we're on a spiritual level that we're talking about, on a theological level. If you take the Family Proclamation seriously about what it says, your gender is an essential characteristic. So let's get into the next clip. This is going to be, let's go to, what do the scriptures say about LGBTQ? I thought this was quite interesting, this discussion. So let me fix this audio real quick, and we'll get into the next clip. Let me share the screen, and here we go.
Jim, did the scriptures support Brigham Young with what he was saying?
No.
So does the scripture support, what do the scriptures say about LGBT stuff?
Nothing.
Nothing. The scriptures don't talk about homosexual behavior and gay sex.
They certainly don't in the Book of Mormon. They certainly don't in the Doctrine and Covenants, and they certainly don't in the Pearl of Great Price. Completely absent. So then you're left with Levitical law.
No, you're also left with Paul affirming Levitical law.
Yeah, you're left with Paul.
All right, so that's something that I kind of found was interesting. I don't want this to be like a bag on Jim Bennett kind of thing, you know. Seems like a nice guy in person, I suppose. I don't know him, but it is interesting. You notice in this conversation a few times that Jim starts to get frustrated with Jacob and saying that he's contradicting himself. I find that to be very ironic because I thought Jim wasn't really contradicting himself, but I don't think Jacob was either. I think Jacob was like sticking with, his guns pretty clearly and logically. I think he had a very linear line of thinking. But it is interesting that like whenever the scriptures get brought up, that Jim seems to ignore the Bible. He's always like, no, it's not in the scriptures. And then Jacob's like, well, it's in the Bible. And he's like, well, okay, it's in the Bible. I don't know if you noticed that, but it is kind of interesting. Like, because Latter-day Saints are in a unique place where we can say, you know, the Bible, as long as it's translated correctly, right? The sola scriptura, people get really mad about it, that we say things like that. So you can have, I guess, a little bit more wiggle room on the Bible. I mean, not that any scripture is completely inerrant, right? Or every scripture is fallible, right? But, you know, we have kind of a special case for the Bible because of all the hands that it went through and the translations and, you know, everyone, you know the story. So, like, but that doesn't mean we don't think it's scripture. But I can kind of see how people would, like, can weasel their way out of the Bible as Latter-day Saints because they can just pick and choose from the Bible, you know. Anyway.
Yeah, I think later too, or I can't remember if it was right there. He just says, like, Jacob brings up something. Well, Jesus said this, and he's like, oh, did Jesus really say that?
Yeah.
Or is that in the Old Testament? And he's like, no, that's in the New Testament. And he's kind of like, oh, okay. And like trying to say like, oh, if it was in the Old Testament, like he can. And I remember thinking the same thing when I was watching this video. I'm like, so you can just justify yourself right out of something being written in the Old Testament or even in the New Testament or even in the Book of Mormon sometimes, just like he does with the proclamation, which is modern prophets, what they've said. He's trying to rationalize his worldview with the scriptures. And this is like, I mean, our last video that you and I had, we talked about Dan McClellan. Dan McClellan is constantly ripping on people like, hey, don't read this. You're reading this into the text. Just let the text speak for itself. And if you let the family proclamation text speak for itself, if you let the New Testament speak for itself, if you let the Old Testament speak for itself, or any standard works, they all have a collective voice that does condemn this type of behavior.
Well, and the living prophets too, you know, like.
Right.
So there is something that part of the reason I want to talk about this too is I feel like there is a misconception, and Jim brings it up here, about how the church has changed over time about LGBTQ stuff and whatnot. And I think I can make a pretty strong case that the church really hasn't changed much at all. Rather, they're adapting to changes in the world about culture and definition that make talks in the past almost sound like very aggressive, when really that's because we're applying like a modern lens of what words mean nowadays as opposed to what they used to mean. For example, Jim Bennett brings this up. There's talks about like he talks about the miracle of forgiveness, about how, you know, the prophets used to say you don't have to be gay, you can control it, and all this stuff that they kind of have changed the language on. Well, I would argue that the meaning gay has actually changed since they gave those words, because it almost exclusively, up until basically 2012, 2015, it almost exclusively meant acting on homosexual behavior. And so when you read all that stuff from like miracle forgiveness and whatnot, and you substitute out like being gay with what they believed it meant, which was you're actively acting on that behavior, participating in that lifestyle, then a lot of those things make sense, because it's like, yeah, you don't have to act that way. And so I think the reason the church has kind of pivoted is because of the change of the definition of the word gay. And they don't want to confuse people to think, you know, like if you have same-sex attraction, you can control that and like stop that. Well, that's not what they're saying now, but I also don't think that's what they were saying back then, because definitions change. Like I think we've all kind of witnessed that if we just kind of open our eyes a little bit and realize that, you know, gay 25 years ago was a lot different of a meaning than it is today, because today it's more in line with like same-sex attraction. And I don't think it was back then. Am I crazy?
No, I think you're spot on. I think that, you know, and that's where this same-sex attraction, like if you're a member of the church and you experience same-sex attraction, well, you're just a normal, I mean, you're a member of the church, just like somebody who experiences, you know, opposite sex attraction.
Yeah.
That doesn't deny you any of your membership or covenant blessings or anything like that. The acting upon the lifestyle is where the church has had to come in and say, hey, this is what we mean when we say this. And I think that you're probably right. Miracle forgiveness, all those things, that's most likely what they meant.
Yeah, I've gone back and seen a lot of quotes, and I think most of them should be interpreted with that lens, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's get into this idea about polygamy, which is kind of interesting. So, you know, that Jim and Jacob kind of represent the two factions of the church, if you will. I kind of think that Jim's faction is shrinking, the idea that like gay marriage is going to be part of the temple and whatnot. But I still think it exists. And one of the arguments that you hear often is this idea that, you know, the church had a different definition of marriage with polygamy. So let's find that clip real quick and see what Jim and Jacob have to say about polygamy and how that has to do with the definition of marriage. Let me share the screen here. And we're going to 48.
Answered at length.
Hold on.
And you
See,
contradict
this is where
yourself
things start
from
to get pretty heated. Jim Bennett
has
gets
to
pretty
continue.
upset. So we're like, right.
Of course they redefine marriage. Of course they redefine marriage. The Republican
it was
Party
always
founded in the 19th century to get rid of the twin relics of barbarism.
I know all about the Republican
polygamy,
Party's agenda.
Because polygamy was considered to be a radical redefinition of marriage, and in fact is. The kind
Actually, polygamy is found in the Bible, and the
gosh.
Book of Mormon specifically authorizes its temporary usage at times. These are standard positions of the church. Now, I agree. I would agree that those who have the idea that it's an eternal principle, that's a mistake. Go read Jacob 2. It's very clear in Jacob 2, monogamy is the norm, and that
Don't listen to Brigham Young talk about how nobody gets into heaven.
I know, he was wrong.
Okay, this is the thing.
This is why your position is incoherent, Jacob.
No, it isn't.
It's nonsense.
Well,
you sit here talking about these eternal principles that can never change, and then I show you scriptures that say they're eternal principles, and you say, oh, those scriptures are wrong. And I show you Brigham Young, a prophet, saying it's eternal. Oh, well, Brigham Young was wrong. I mean,
are you familiar with my collective witness?
Okay, then Jacob starts to get into the collective witness model a little bit, because they're kind of talking over each other. But yeah, Taylor, were you able to follow along with that?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on
I think
the definition of polygamy and how it changed?
Well, so I didn't catch that. I didn't catch the first part of it. My audio's kind of jacked up, but I mean the like his whole point is like, oh look, marriage was defined this way and then it wasn't. So that's a change in marriage. Well,
right.
Polygamy, like it or not, which I mean, it's always been between man and wife, like one man and a wife, and each individual sealing is an individual sealing. Like they weren't all sealed together necessarily. The man was sealed to each woman. So that was, there's just not that much difference when you look at it that way.
It's
so I don't
marriage, not like these polyamorous relationships,
Exactly. They are one man and he has multiple marriages. Yes, but they are each individually sealed. It's not, it's just how it worked. So, I mean, the only thing that's changed is to say, hey, we're not going to allow one man to have those plural.
Well, we kind of do still because of like President Nelson, as a wife that passed away and a wife now.
Correct.
So in that sense, it really hasn't changed because it still exists. It's just not existing on the earth right now. And I think Jacob pointed out, like the anyone who was saying it was like necessary for exaltation, I think clearly we're wrong. And I also think we need to give some charity to people who might have said that, who aren't here to kind of clarify what they meant. And because, you could see that maybe being said, and I don't know all the context of those quotes, but anyway, and they could have just straight up been wrong, which, I'm comfortable with as well. But it isn't a different definition of marriage. But interestingly, though, it is kind of weird that you can pull in things, because the other one that we won't look at here is the blacks in the priesthood, and how like black members of the church weren't allowed to receive the priesthood until like the 70s. And so they look at that and say, hey, that changed. They were wrong about that, so it should change. But like the funny thing is like you could just easily argue the opposite and say like, hey, they've never changed baptism. That means they're never going to change about gay marriage. Or you could say, oh, they changed about this thing that's unrelated, so that means they're going to change about this thing that's unrelated. You could just go back and forth and cherry pick something that you feel like they've changed and then say that means they're going to change here. No, it doesn't.
Right.
Or you could also pick something that's not going to change and say that means they're not going to change. It's kind of just a silly argument.
It is silly because you could always do that. But the other thing is too is this is something that Jacob. This is where I think Jacob's strongest point is. This issue specifically is fundamental to it's fundamental to our temple theology. It's fundamental to
it is
the family units. It's how we're created. We are. I mean, it is a binary gender. It's a binary. So I mean, there's no life that springs out of men and men or women and women. They can't procreate. So the whole essence of the gospel plan and plan of salvation is built upon the dichotomy between male and female. So this is something, it's not, I mean, sure, when you argue those other things like temple changes and or some other things, that policy changes within the church, or even the big ones like, the 1978, blacks receiving the priesthood. We're talking about something fundamental to the, to our doctrine. It's just something that the rest of it, I mean, what else do you have? I mean, and Jacob goes there. He says the crown jewel of the restoration is the temple. The crown jewel, the crown doctrine of that is the sealing ordinance, and that's between a man and a woman. So I think it's so fundamental to who we are that you can't change that and just be like, oh yeah, we changed it.
Yeah, I mean, there's different genders for a reason, and I think Jesus explains that a little bit, and I think. We kind of take this modern lens to go back and look at the scriptures, and there's some people who like try and weasel their way through to adjust it, but like there's a reason we have modern prophets as well, because I don't think any of those weaseling through the scriptures work very well, because I think the scriptures in a united body are pretty clear on the matter. But let's get into this, though. I want to get your thoughts on this, Taylor, about when Jim, this is kind of the cracking point, I think, the climax of the heated part of the debate. So let's see what happens when Jim accuses Jacob of actually being a hurt to the church, hurting the church, causing all kinds of damage. And hold on. Here we go. He
knows the boundaries, so he's not going to come out and explicitly say that.
No, but it's my secret agenda. And I'm plotting with John DeLynn and Bill Reel. I mean, I'm not
saying it's something like that. I'm saying that it's just what it is that
Jacob, sit down and shut up for a
manifests what you're.
No, because you've sat here now for the last few minutes and said, I go and I commiserate, and I am conspiring essentially with the enemies of the church to try to bring it down from the inside and to try to change it from the inside. And I am doing something that is deeply destructive and painful. Let me give you some straight talk here. I don't think anybody is more destructive to people's testimonies than people like you and people like Desnat and people who take this sort of absolutely, I speak this pure.
All right, so you heard it there, that no one hurts the church more than people like Jacob Hansen. Wild take, I think. And honestly, he kind of admitted at the beginning that, like, I don't know much about you. I haven't watched much of your stuff.
Yeah.
And then he comes out and says that. It's like, whoa, dude. Which, okay, yeah, again, I'm not trying to make this some kind of like, us, like, I'd rather take more of a neutral stance and analyze what's going on with Jacob and Jim here. Obviously, I'm more aligned with what Jacob's saying. But, I mean, it's so hard to watch this and not be like, okay, like, obviously, Jacob makes a lot more sense in this conversation. Even if you agree with Jim, it just didn't go very well for Jim in this conversation, which, by the way, kudos to Jim that he allowed this video to be put up. So I think that's awesome. And, maybe since he's watching, been like, I hate this video. In fact, I'm sure he has. So I don't want to like hold anything against him or whatnot. I'm sure he doesn't like how the conversation turned out. But, I applaud him for allowing this video to be brought forward so we can talk about this, because I think it's an important topic. Anyway, go ahead, Taylor.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Jim, but like, dude, if you're going to go out and voice your opinions publicly, then you better be ready for people to disagree with you. So, I mean, I think that, the idea that, like, that is what's hurting the church. I listened to a talk, Elder Holland gave a talk a few years ago about, people saying, oh, like, well, this isn't what Jesus would do. Jesus would just love, 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 love. And there's a difference between, like, they're conflating love with accepting this behavior, accepting this type of thing, and commiserating with these people. Like, look, this is what Jesus did. Yeah, true. Jesus did do those things. But this is also the same Jesus that said, hey, if you're not going to pick up your cross and follow me, then you're not worthy of me. If your eye offends you, pluck it out.
I was just going to say that, yeah.
Great line. Exactly. I came not to bring peace, but a sword in Matthew 10. Like, I mean, this is not that. Jesus Christ is not that type of God. True love is caring about their eternal salvation. And so that truth and those principles that bug him so much, and I'm going to bring the truth. Yes, that is true love, from the way I see it. And that's from what I see from not only modern day prophets, but the scriptures. Christ himself was like that. So, hard to say that that's what hurts the church. It's an interesting take.
Yeah. And I think it hasn't aged well, because I think Jacob's done a lot of good things that have, in fact, that's why I kind of was reviewing this. I've been looking at a lot of different Jacob's moments, because I'm working on a video, and this is one that I was watching, and I was like, holy cow, I forgot about how, like, intense this was.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because, like, Jacob's now talked to Alex O'Connor multiple times. He's had debates with some, probably the best debate out there on the Book of Mormon with Trent Horn on Pints with Aquinas, and talking to a lot of people that I think is bringing people into the fold. And I think he gets a lot of messages all the time, so good for him. But, okay. Now, this last thing I got to bring up is actually related to a video I recently released about the pamphlet. I actually still have it right here. The pamphlet, To Young Men Only. I don't know if you caught that video, but you should go check it out if you haven't. The controversial pamphlet that was taken down. I found a copy of it, and fun stuff. So, but funny enough, Jim mentioned the pamphlet, and I was like, oh, yeah. So let me share what Jim said about the pamphlet, and then, people in the chat, if you can, go back and check out the video I made about it, if you haven't seen it already, and tell me what you think about Jim's take on To Young Men Only, and kind of what me and Sit Down with Sky came up with, independently, by the way. I asked Sit Down with Sky, Skyler is his name. I told him my thoughts on it, and he was like, yeah, I pretty much share those same thoughts. And so we like collaborated on this video about the To Young Men Only pamphlet. Again, I hold in my hand that very pamphlet, the same copy. All right, let's listen to Jim.
And we're unrecognizably inclusive than we were when I was a kid and was handed For Young Men Only by Boyd K. Packer, which said that it's okay to beat up your companion if he's gay.
I don't think it does.
Your missionary companion.
Well, I think Steve's getting to the point that you gotta.
All right, yeah, I just had to point that out. He's like, it says it's okay to beat up your companion if they're gay, which I think that kind of summarizes a lot of Jim's kind of takes here. Is he seems to take kind of this caricature, this straw man, if you will. I mean, everyone kind of straw mans on accents here and there, so I want to give some grace. But like, it's pretty silly when he says something like that. I think when you read it, you can, I don't know, come up with a decision yourself. But I think that is a very cynical take on what Elder Packer's trying to say. And this goes back to what a bigger idea here, which I think is that the church actually hasn't changed that much. But first, before I go on a little rant, Taylor, your thoughts?
I think this sums up everything that in of itself sums up everything that Jim is about. And I think that this whole faction of the church, that I think, like, I agree with you. I think it's dying. I think people realize, hey, you know what? This isn't going to happen. This stuff isn't changing necessarily. It has changed quite a bit, the way that these individuals that experience same-sex attraction are handled. But Greg Mattson, I think, does a great job explaining these types of things, where it's like, hey, we're not going to be like the niceness culture and kind of the spiral of silence within the church, and like everybody needs to love each other, and if we just love each other, everything's going to be okay. Well, what does true love actually mean? And this comment by him, which I've never read for Young Men Only.
You gotta read it, man.
I know, I got to go through and read it just to make sure make sure Jim was, keep Jim honest there. But I think and even like it's people like this, like, oh, well, these are the guys that were doing shock therapy at BYU to people that thought they were gay and stuff like that. And
yeah.
I mean, I've never looked deep into that stuff, but like, I agree. I think it's kind of cynical, and I think it goes to show like that you can be empathy can be weaponized. I guess is where I'm going with this. Like the niceness culture around, making sure people feel welcome. Yes, we should make sure everybody feels welcome to come to church, but we should also defend the truth of the gospel and defend those true principles over all else.
Well, President Nelson, when a prophet at BYU, gave a wonderful talk about all of this, and he said, we can't not tell the truth. That would not be loving you. Like, we have to say what the truth is. Korihor writes, nuance evades some people. Yeah, and there's a lot of that here. So, like, I don't want to say the church hasn't, like, changed at all. Like, there has been some adaptation for sure. And the church is trying to find the best ways they can to deal with this. I mean, it is a problem about like how to, handle this in a way that treats people lovingly, but also defending the truth and keeping to the standards that are the church. So that gets me to an interesting point that I want to bring up here. A lot of people, and Jim in this same conversation brings up the fact that he was upset about what is now known as the 2015 exclusion policy. I don't know if you remember when that came out, but people were kind of freaking out because the policy essentially said that children that are children to gay couples, either lesbians or gay men, can't be baptized unless authorized by the first presidency of the church. And people were really upset about that. And, it caused this great schism. And then the prophet, which was still President Monson at the time, right? Because when did President Nelson come in? 2018, I think. Anyway, they said it was Revelation when it came out. And then fast forward, like, I don't know how much longer later. It was like 2016. They came out with an update to that, where they said it was also Revelation, and no longer did it require approval from the first presidency. they lowered that approval back down to stake presence at the local level. Now, a lot of people talk about that as being a reversal, and they say, how could you have a revelation that later on gets reversed? And I think, here's my hot take, if you will. No, I don't know if it's a hot take. I think that's a complete misreading, okay? It didn't reverse at all. It's the exact same policy. You still need approval to get baptized. They just changed who that approval goes through. And to me, it makes a lot of sense that when they're first establishing this, they want it to go all the way up to themselves, the first presidency, so they can get a feel for what it's like before they hand it back down via the lower jurisdiction to bishops and stake presidents. And so, like, nothing changed, nothing reversed. It was just like, hey, we're going to approve this for a while, see what it's like, so they can have their boots on the ground, essentially, to see what's going on. And then they receive the revelation later. Okay, now that we know what it's like, we've witnessed it firsthand, we were the ones approving it, we feel comfortable and a spiritual confirmation that we can pass this down, and our stake presidents and bishops can handle this at the local level. Totally fine. So, like, when people get upset about that, I'm like, nothing reversed. Like, you can be upset. This isn't a question about, like, if it's okay to be upset or if you don't like it or not. Okay, put that to the side. The thing here is, like, just, like, zooming out a little bit, I'm like, nothing changed. And so when people talked about getting upset and then being comfortable with the reverse, I'm like, nothing really changed. It still has to be approved. It's just, well, who's... Anyway, and maybe I completely misunderstand all of that, but... And someone, Bob Kursek, says it's a hateful policy. You might think that, but, like, the policy never flip-flopped. And so,
right,
you know, the people who say that they're comfortable with it changing again, I don't know. I don't get that because it's still the same. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, yeah. What's crazy about it is, like, even at, like, so I can remember as a missionary, I can remember you needing certain type of approval. And this was before that, 2015.
Yeah,
I returned from my mission in 2015. There's always been a filter
approval
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, there's always been a filter, like, hey, we're not just going to let some district leader somewhere interview somebody, you know, and let them be baptized. Like, there was always another level to that. And so for me, I remember I had just gotten home from my mission in 2015, and that happened. Everybody's freaking out about it. And I'm like, guys, this isn't that much different than what was already, like, it's just escalated up higher up in the hierarchy of the priesthood. So I didn't see it as that big of a deal. And even when they brought it back, I'm like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
You know, so, like, there was always a filter there.
Yeah. And I got to apologize to Kiori. I accidentally called you Korihor because Church of Korihor is in here saying a whole bunch of stuff. Sorry, Kiori. You're the one who said nuance evades some people. I'm trying to, like, do a bunch of things at once. I hope you'll forgive me. All right. Any last words on this conversation between Jim and Jacob? If you haven't seen it, by the way, it's worth checking out no matter what side you're on. You know, I think this is a conversation that will be brought up again. It's kind of fizzled down, in my opinion. It's going to be brought up again. I don't think it's completely solved. I still think there's a lot of people who think what Jim Bennett is saying is correct, and a lot of people who think that what Jacob is saying is correct. And, you know, I don't think the church is ever going to change on that. I really don't.
No.
And
they're not.
So, you know, we need to be comfortable with that. And, you know, as the phrase that everyone keeps saying that I really love is, don't put your faith in change, put it in Christ, which I think is a good strategy. Let's get into the next segment, which is hidden gems. So let's hit this video real quick. All right, so real quick, before we get to the hidden gems, the trunk treasures, just a reminder of the purpose of the channel is to elevate members of the church by building bridges of understanding through fun and informative content, and to help honest actors to take the church seriously by exposing the limitations of critics and correcting misconceptions. We got some Pachyderm members and the big one, the mammoth, always searching for further light and knowledge, need further light and knowledge. Thank you for helping further that mission. But here we go. So there's this conversation going on about free will, and it's a really exciting one about, you know, do we actually have real free will, libertarian free will, or can somehow things that are determined align with free will? So I actually made this short. Let me pull it up real quick. Yeah, we can skip verification. I don't know if people caught it. The impact that creation ex nihilo has on free will. That's one of the biggest problems with classical theism. So basically, the impact. I talk about the problem that creation ex nihilo has on free will, because here's the basic problem. I'm just kind of saying it in not the most philosophical terms. If you have a God who created everything from nothing and also knew everything that you were going to do, and he created you knowing that you were going to do all these things and has foreknowledge of what you're going to do, you can't do otherwise. And so therefore you don't have free will. And that's kind of a hot topic, because Jordan Peterson went on Jubilee and someone actually challenged him on that. And unfortunately, I love Jordan Peterson. I don't think he had a good comeback to that. And it was interesting to see that the guy almost made the exact argument I made here. Like, if God knows exactly how you're going to be acting and he's perfect and he knows the future, you can't do the alternative, so you don't have free will. Anyway, Taylor, are you familiar with some of this free will conversation? Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I am. And so I think this is why most people like Alex O'Connor and like most atheists think that the Christian God, you know, as creedal Christians define him, as Jordan Peterson defined him in that video. I haven't seen that video yet, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I think that this is exactly why they struggle so much, because if that's the God that you believe in is a God, you know, created everything ex nihilo, so and created you and knows all, is omnipresent, omniscient, all the things, right? Then that God is pretty sick and twisted. He's kind of a monster, because if he knows everything that you're going to do, and he can stop it, and he chooses not to, or he chooses that. That's why atheists struggle so much with this type of theology out of creedal Christianity. And that's why you see a lot of guys like Alex O'Connor, when he says, oh, if I was going to be any type of Christian, it'd probably be Mormon. And the Christians they're like shocked. They're like, wait, what? Those guys aren't Christians. They don't even believe in the Trinity. Yeah. And it's like, well, yeah, dude, because it's kind of, you know, if you take, that's, you know, if you're a Calvinist and you take those things to their logical, at least they do. I mean, they take them to the logical conclusion. It's like, yep, some are chosen and some are just not chosen of God. Yep. And it's like, ew, that's not an all loving God.
So I had to put this comment up here because Braden Sorensen 966 is one of my biggest fans. You know, he's always hate watching a lot of my content, but we agree on something, Braden. He said actions are determined. If I make cakes for a living and I make a bad cake, I would be a bad baker. Substitute cakes with humans and baker with God. And I replied, and I was like, yeah, under this traditional Christianity, that makes a lot of sense. You know, it kind of works. And so like, we agree, you know, that's kind of what I'm pointing out. Like, yes, things are determined. If he set it up this way, knowing exactly what you're going to do, he perfectly knows the future. He perfectly knows what's going to happen. That means the opposite can't happen. So you don't have the ability to choose the alternative. And part of me questions if certain Latter-day Saints or ex-Mormons really understand that, because I get the sense that there's at least a few, and even John DeLynn was exposed about this with the Stick of Joseph, that he doesn't really understand why the creation ex nihilo rejection is so important and why the eternal pre-existence is so important, you know, kind of a thing.
Well, not to get, I mean, I think that, you know, Latter-day Saint theology is so different. And I think that most people culturally, at least in the United States, are some of that Protestant creedal Christianity stuff rubs off on us. So we don't necessarily understand. There's like Protestant Mormons out there that, like, you're Mormon, but you kind of have these like Protestant weird things that don't really align with our theology. So that totally checks out. There's tons of stuff like that within the faith that not just the creation ex nihilo, but a lot of other things as well. And so it's important to point that out, because our theology is very, very different than that.
And it works.
But culturally, and it works a lot better.
It's very I think a better theology than mainstream Christianity. Though, like you said, there are Latter-day Saints who believe in what's called a compatibilist free will, which is that, things are determined and yet we still have free will. I have yet to see anything to convince me of that. I'm still open to it, I suppose, but I'm very much on the libertarian free will, because to me, that is actually free will. Like, we are co-creators with God of the future. He gives us that ability to create with him what's going to happen. Anyway, here's another person who I think is a creedal Christian who says, you act according to your will, therefore you have free will. However, to say you choose your will is absurd. God's predestination does not mean you don't have free will. See, I think like phrases like that, God's predestination does not mean you don't have free will. I hear that and I say, well, then you're not talking about free will. You're talking about something else. So like his argument here, we kind of went back and forth. It was a great conversation. Sivan Thomas, I enjoyed it. I thought it was very pleasant. And so I responded. I said, if you can't choose your will, then how can you have free will? Your will is determined. Does this not have the same issue? Right, that might be like a later reply. I don't know if that makes sense exactly. Oh, if you can't choose your will, then how can you have free will? Your will is determined. Does this not? I don't understand myself there. Anyway, we had a conversation. And so some of you in the chat might be compatibilistic when it comes to free will. The Church Core says compatibilism. There is no free will, but that idea shapes your will, so you might as well act as if there is free will. I mean, yeah, that's pretty kind of it. Maybe Church of Core, I know that you like to watch these things and disagree with me a lot of stuff. That's great. Maybe we can agree here that compatibilism, I don't know where you stand, Church of Core. You might be on the everything's determined, which is a view. I think I don't agree with that view either. But can we at least agree that compatibilism doesn't make sense? I think we can, right, Church of Core? Anyway, but it's an ongoing thing. I want to hear more conversations about it. I'm not like a philosopher. And so I want to hear, especially from Latter-day Saints who think that a free will and like the compatibilist version does work. Church of Horror says, I am a compatibilist, but I can be convinced. Interesting. Well, then I guess we still disagree. We'll find something we agree on, Church of Horror. Anyway, so Random User Force says the majority of philosophers are compatibilists. They're also atheists, a lot of them.
Yep, they are. So
I don't know why that matters. That doesn't persuade me at all. Like, I don't care what initials you have by your name. Okay, so let's get into, if you can be convinced, does that mean you have free will?
Five Guys is an agreeable topic. Yep, Five Guys is great. We can agree.
Shoot, I wish I could. I'm just kidding. I like hamburgers, sure. All right, it's all love. It's just a love fest here, right? We all like, we can find things we agree on, even though we have radical different views on different things. But let's get into the last topic, which is the breaking news, the Big Ears Bulletin. Let's hit it.
Run.
All right. As I said before, RetzLive, Retzlaff, RetzLove. No, not RetzLove. Retz accused of sexual assault. I'm sure you've heard about this. I know you're a sports fan, Taylor. This
big time.
The intersection of sports and the church and accusation. So I wanted to bring it up. It's what a lot of people are talking about. I know you're not a BYU fan.
That's right.
I grew up around you. I'm a big BYU fan. You were not. So I want to get your perspective as an outsider who's not a BYU fan. Have you seen much about this? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm definitely not a BYU sports fan. I am a running Ute. I love the Utes. So are
you happy?
I don't say I would be happy. I
happy that some girl might have been sexually assaulted. I'm just kidding.
You monster. No.
Monster.
I like to pause on these things because you just never know. Like you never know what actually happened. I like to hold my breath until more evidence comes out with regards to the actual accusation of sexual assault itself. So it is a civil case. That kind of says some things to me like, okay, well, that's interesting. And it's coming out now a few years later, and he's gotten into some of that NIL money. And now this shows up. It's kind of like, that makes me think. But at the same time, you have to take these things seriously. Now, from a like it being BYU, if you are Jake Retzlaff, this is where I kind of laugh. I'm like, well, if this was USC, that's all you really care about. Are these accusations accurate or not? But since this is BYU, the fact that there's smoke there, okay, so there's definitely some honor code violations that's got to be
probably
that's got to be thrown at him, and that means suspension. So, I mean,
yeah, I think. Well, let me ask you: even if this comes out as like not true, do you think he plays at all next year?
I think it's going to be tough for him to play it all next year because he plays at BYU. If he played at any other school in the country, if this came out to not be true, he'd have no problem.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really tough to see him on the field.
Yeah,
I think it's possible, but I'm not counting on it. And honestly, like I read through the Salt Lake Tribune's original article about it. Like, I don't know if it's true or not, but it sounds pretty plausible. And as far as like the accusations are concerned, she did go and get a rape test kit, from what I understand, at the hospital, which I think at the time, which I think is huge, because if they can prove it, that's a big deal. Like, I want them to be able to prove this. Like, it sounds plausible, honestly. It sounds like it maybe could have happened. I don't want to like condemn or like say he's guilty if he's not, but like, you know, you got to do the due process. But at the same time, like, it's a very believable thing, in my opinion. And so I would love to see, you know, the fact that she went and had that done, that should be good news for Retzlaff if he's innocent, because then, you know, they can probably prove that he's innocent. But if he's guilty, oh, that's good news, because then, like, I hope the truth comes out. You know, I hope it's not like, oh, they settled it quietly, and then BYU is like on the spotlight of like how they're going to deal with it, because it's like, you know, BYU's like, well, you know, it's privately settled, but there's still this huge accusation, and you got the honor code, so we probably just won't play you anyway because we don't want the bad press, you know.
And that's what I was going to ask you, because I know you're a big BYU guy. I was like, okay, so what happens if it comes out he's innocent? They can prove it.
If they can prove it, I think you gotta go with what they said and like be okay with it.
I mean, but as far as him playing though, like even if he is innocent, okay, well there's some other stuff you got to worry about, it being BYU.
Well, okay, like, the honor code stuff though isn't as enforced as it used to be, in the sense that like different coaches, like, you know, the famous one is Brandon Davies with Jimmer Fredette's team, which was a really, really good basketball team that was very significantly impacted by the loss of Brandon Davies, and they still went to the Sweet 16. And, you know, everyone knows what happened there. He broke the honor code. They suspended him, and he willingly came forward, by the way, to admit that he had broken the honor code. From what I've heard from different things, and having gone to the school myself, you know, like, they might handle it in a more private way. I don't think the Brandon Davies thing is ever going to happen again. I think they look at that and they have changed their ways because they don't want to like shame people publicly. That's not the purpose of it. So that's why, you know, like they kind of get away with it. Like when you look at like the roster from week to week, you get some stuff that's like, oh, they're not playing, and they don't have to disclose an injury, but it could be that it's not an injury and it could be an honor code thing potentially. I don't know.
Right.
So I think if they were going to have to do some kind of honor code violation stuff, we wouldn't really know concretely that that's what's going on. They might say like, we're starting so-and-so over him, and they're not going to explain why. Or like, he's just not available this week, and they're not going to explain why. Like, it could be injury, it could be something else. And that could last the entire season if he's still on the team.
Right.
Which he might. It is also possible that like they just think it's such a bad situation that he's just not on the team anymore. Especially like if he gets proven guilty, they might just kick him off the team. Like that could happen.
Bye-bye.
You know,
and see ya.
In fact, I think that would happen if he's guilty. If it's like, there's kind of three scenarios, right? Like he's guilty. Okay, well, he's off the team. It's settled privately. No one really knows. I don't think he ends up playing. I think maybe it's honor code stuff. Whatever reason, they probably get around a way to not let him play because they don't want to deal with it. Or third, it comes out he's innocent. And then I think we could potentially see him on the field. I just don't think we're going to get a clear enough answer to justify him on the field, you know? Because even if he comes out,
honestly,
even if it goes in his favor, you know, there might be, there's still the possibility that the court got it wrong. And then you have to deal with like, people maybe protested like, hey, like the court was wrong. He's a rapist. You don't want that at all. Yeah. It's a terrible thing.
No, you don't want. I honestly, just talking like X's and O's, I don't know if it's the worst thing for him. I'm not a huge I'm not a BYU fan, but I was not a big Retzlaff fan. I think he's a good college quarterback. He can win you games, but I think BYU had a dang good offensive line last year that covered up quite a bit.
That's not going to errant throws for sure. That he played well though. But yeah, it might be. You never know. It could be.
He played well.
This blessing in disguise, as they say.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying this might not be the worst thing if you're BYU. You might want to just get.
They did just get a really good quarterback freshman, I think, that signed. That's supposed to be like really good, and he was going to have to sit behind. Just throw him to the wolves,
If he shows some promise, I would throw him out there, let him learn.
Yeah, and that might be the excuse. They might be like, they might have like thought, no, we're going to play Retzlaff, but as soon as this comes out, now it's like, well,
you just gave us the pass to
exactly like even if because I would have predicted that Retzlaff wasn't going to start all games next season anyway. I thought by 6, 7, 8 games, I would expect them to. It depends.
They got that kid from Utah State too, right? That he transferred. The kid from Utah State.
We have a pretty decent depth at quarterback going into the season. I think.
So, they don't. I don't know if you'd miss him that much, but yeah, it's not a good look.
And it's a frustrating thing when it comes to relaying this back to the church because, he's not a member of the church, but he's at the school, and like there's a lot of focus on the quarterback of BYU. Like you said, if it was some other school, I don't know if people would. Well, I don't know, maybe people outside of Utah aren't even paying attention to this story, but I think it's a big story.
I wonder. It's a big deal. I wonder how it would be different too. Say if this were Zach Wilson, who is a member of the church. So what if it was Zach Wilson that had this happen? I think that changes things too.
Reaction would change that much though, just because, in either case, they both kind of agreed via the honor code to live certain standards. So I guess that's the story here. That
you could convince me of that, but I do think it changes in the sense that Zach Wilson, I don't know, but like a guy like Zach Wilson or some member of the church, I think it does. You lived with those values. Those types of values, and yeah, you can agree to the honor code and not be a member of the church.
Yeah.
But those guys outside of that probably haven't lived those values most of their life. And Zach Wilson probably has. That does. I think that does change things a little bit.
Yeah.
But
it is interesting.
Worth talking.
Anyway, yeah. All right. That's all we have for today's show. Any last words? Did we cover everything we needed to with Jim and Jacob? Are you satisfied there?
Yeah, I think this is an ongoing conversation that'll continue.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think that's a good thing. I think talking about things is good, is healthy. I would love to see a part 2. Let me put out the just out into the atmosphere that if Jacob
Let's make it happen.
And Jim got together and talked, knowing beforehand kind of where each stands, and they were, a little bit more prepared for each other, I think that'd be a really good conversation. I don't think that's going to happen. And, I want to be respectful to both parties here. I don't want to tear down either, but I think Jim had a tough time in this conversation. I think the comments show that everyone was agreeing with Jacob. And, I think that because of a lot of what Jacob's done, I think this conversation is not as big as it once was. I think that's a good thing. I think there is more unity now than there was. There's going to be something that comes up that kind of divides it again. And then these conversations are going to happen. So worth revisiting. But Taylor, you still doing the TikTok thing?
I haven't been on it for a while, but I'm itching to get back in there. I know there's a lot of stuff out there that TikTok's just such a big platform nowadays, and a lot of misinformation out there. And so it's important that we raise a voice to the truth. And you got guys like Brother Miller on TikTok, and a lot of these other guys that are out there doing the legwork. I got to get back in the trenches with them. So.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, check him out at No Unhallowed Hand. Is that right?
Yep.
On TikTok. You need to transition over to YouTube at some point.
I know that's the next move too. I gotta get cracking on that.
Yeah, it's fun over on the YouTube side. All right. Thank you everyone for being here. Apologize for the technical difficulties we were having at the beginning. I hope you were able to stick around. I see people in the chat. Thank you for being here. And stay tuned for new stuff coming out. I got some very interesting stuff. You'll see clips from Jacob Hansen. You'll see clips from Alex O'Connor, of all people, coming up over the next 2 weeks. So make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already. Thank you for being here, and we'll catch you in the next one.